For 2 years, I drove my granddaughter to piano lessons every single week, through rain, snow, and scorching summer heat. I thought I was part of her musical journey, a silent pillar behind every note she played. But at her big recital, when the teacher thanked Mom and Dad for their unwavering support, my name wasn't even mentioned. I smiled, clapped like nothing happened, but in that moment I decided something no one in my family would ever forget. My name is Mary. At 58, I never imagined I'd be living in my daughter's house again. For most of my adult life, I had been independent, working in a small accounting office, managing my own modest apartment, and paying my own bills. But time has a way of humbling you. 2 winters ago, a combination of worsening arthritis and a sudden increase in rent forced me to rethink my life. That's when Anna, my only daughter, offered me a place in her home. She had said it in such a warm, casual tone. "It'll be fun, Mom," she told me over the phone. "Emily loves having you around, and you shouldn't be living alone in that cold apartment. This way you can save money, and we'll all get to spend more time together." Her voice had been laced with sincerity, or so I thought. I moved in that spring. Anna's house was spacious, with a sunny guest room overlooking the backyard. My son-in-law, Mark, was polite and easygoing, though often busy with work, and Emily, my 10-year-old granddaughter, was thrilled. The first night I stayed over, she brought me a small drawing of the 2 of us holding hands, a piano in the background. The first few weeks felt almost idyllic. I'd wake up early, make coffee for myself, and sometimes breakfast for the family if Anna had early meetings. I kept my things tidy, respectful of their home. I offered to help around the house, and Anna welcomed it. Soon, I found myself naturally taking on more responsibilities, not because she asked, but because I wanted to. Emily's school days were busy. She had piano lessons every Saturday morning. Anna mentioned how hard it was to keep up with the schedule, so I volunteered to take her. "It's no trouble," I assured her. "I love driving, and it'll give Emily and me some time together." Anna smiled gratefully. "You're a lifesaver, Mom." And so it began. Week after week, rain or shine, I drove Emily to her lessons. We developed our own little routine. On cold mornings, I'd pack her favorite hot cocoa in a thermos. On sunny days, we'd stop for ice cream on the way home. Sometimes she'd practice her scales in the car, her little fingers tapping out invisible keys on her knees. I didn't mind the time or the effort. In fact, I cherished it. It made me feel useful, needed, and connected to my granddaughter in a way that felt special. I wasn't just staying with Anna. I was part of this family's rhythm, woven into the daily melody of their lives. The more I helped, the more natural it became. If Anna had to work late, I'd prepare dinner. If Emily needed help with homework, I'd be there. I began covering small expenses here and there, groceries, gas for the endless piano trips, even a new music stand when her old one broke. It wasn't much, but it made me feel like I was contributing, not just taking up space. Every Saturday, I'd sit quietly at the back of the piano studio while Emily practiced. I listened to the same exercises week after week, marveling at how much she improved. Over time, I got to know her teacher, who would often say, "Emily's progress is amazing. She must be practicing a lot at home. You must be proud, Mrs. Thompson." I'd smile and nod, my heart swelling. Evenings in the house were warm. Mark would come home, Emily would chatter about her day, and Anna and I would share a glass of tea in the kitchen. Sometimes we'd reminisce about when she was Emily's age, how I'd sit by her as she practiced the old upright piano in our living room. She'd laugh, shake her head, and say, "Guess history repeats itself, huh, Mom?" In those moments, I truly believed moving in had been the right decision. I believed Anna valued me not just as a mother, but as a partner in raising Emily. Looking back, I realize how easy it is to mistake comfort for security. At the time, everything seemed perfect. My daughter was happy. My granddaughter was thriving, and I felt like I had a place again. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have imagined, was that beneath the surface of this picture-perfect life, there were cracks. Tiny, almost invisible at first, but destined to spread. For now, though, I was content. I felt needed. I felt loved. I felt like family. And I had no idea that all of that was about to change. Living with Anna was, on the surface, remarkably smooth. We'd always been close, or at least I thought so. She had been my only child, the center of my life after her father passed away. I'd always prided myself on giving her space, letting her live her life. Moving in felt like an extension of that relationship, not an intrusion. Anna had a way about her, warm, charming, and organized to the last detail. She liked schedules. The house ran on a clock. Breakfast at 7:15, Emily out the door by 7:50, laundry on Thursdays, and a strict quiet hour after 9:30. I respected her routines, even adjusted my own habits to fit. If I wanted tea in the evening, I'd brew it early so I wouldn't disturb her. Still, I began to notice little things. Anna would remind me gently about house rules, as though I might forget. "Mom, don't forget. Emily needs the living room for practice at 4:00. So maybe keep the TV low then." Or, "Oh, Mom, I noticed you parked in the driveway. Mark likes it free when he comes home." Her voice was always calm, never rude, but I felt the subtle boundary lines being drawn. At first, I told myself it was normal. After all, it was her house. I was a guest. Well, not a guest exactly, but I didn't own the place. I reminded myself to be grateful. And I was. But then there were the comments. Small, almost throwaway lines that didn't seem to carry malice on the surface. "You're lucky to be here, Mom. Some people your age have to pay for assisted living." Or, "It's good we can help each other. You save on rent and I save on childcare." She'd laugh after saying it, and I'd laugh too, even as a little sting settled deep inside me. Mark, my son-in-law, was always polite. He worked long hours at a law firm, and when he came home, he appreciated a warm meal and a quiet house. We didn't talk much, but there was a mutual respect. I stayed out of his way, and he stayed out of mine. He never made the kind of comments Anna did, but he didn't correct them either. Emily was my joy. She didn't care about house rules or adult boundaries. She just wanted her grandmother. We spent hours together, not just at piano lessons, but baking cookies, working on her school projects, or walking in the park. She never made me feel like an outsider. In her eyes, I was family. Anna and I still had good moments. We'd cook together on Sundays, sometimes sharing a bottle of wine while Emily played in the background. Anna would tell me about her work, her friends, her plans for Emily's future. She wasn't cold or cruel, but there was a shift I couldn't quite name, something unspoken that hovered in the air. It was in the way she always emphasized my house when talking about renovations or expenses. It was in how she sometimes referred to me as staying here for a while when talking to others. It was in the slight hesitation before she introduced me to someone new, as though she had to decide how to frame my presence. I chose not to confront her. I told myself I was imagining things. Maybe she was just stressed from work. Maybe she didn't realize how her words sounded. After all, she had welcomed me in when I needed a place. She had given me a home. But somewhere, quietly, I began to feel a small shift inside myself. I went out more. Longer walks, trips to the library, errands that didn't need running, just to give her space. I stopped using certain parts of the house unless invited. I even kept my own groceries on a separate shelf in the fridge, though Anna never asked me to. I told myself it was to be considerate, but if I'm honest, it was because I didn't want to overstep. I didn't want to give her a reason to regret inviting me in. Looking back now, I see how those small adjustments were the first cracks. At the time, they felt like nothing, tiny compromises for the sake of harmony, but they were the first signs that my place in this house wasn't as solid as I believed. For now, life went on as usual. I drove Emily to her lessons, cooked meals, kept the house tidy. Outwardly, we were still the picture of a happy, multi-generational home. But under the surface, there was a quiet imbalance, a subtle shift in power I didn't yet understand. And if I had noticed more closely, I might have realized that Anna understood it perfectly. The first real red flag came on a Saturday morning, though at the time I brushed it off as nothing. Emily had just finished her lesson and we were packing up when Anna arrived. She'd been too busy to attend most lessons, but today she'd promised to meet the teacher to discuss Emily's progress. I stayed in the background, as I usually did, listening quietly while Anna spoke to Mrs. Davis, the piano teacher. "Emily's doing wonderfully," Mrs. Davis said warmly. "Her consistency in coming to lessons is outstanding. It's rare to see that level of dedication from a family." Anna smiled, her tone light but deliberate. "Oh, we make it work. Mark and I juggle our schedules to keep her on track. It's not always easy, but we know it's worth it." I stood there holding Emily's music books, my keys still in my hand from driving her, just like I had for the past 2 years. I told myself Anna probably didn't mean anything by it. Maybe she didn't think it was necessary to explain the specifics. But a part of me felt a small, sharp sting. It wasn't about credit or recognition. I didn't need applause for doing what I loved. But hearing my role completely erased in that moment made me feel invisible. A few weeks later, there was a small gathering at Anna's house. It was nothing fancy, just a barbecue with some friends and neighbors. I helped in the kitchen, preparing snacks and making sure Emily was entertained. As the guests arrived, Anna moved through the crowd with her usual ease, introducing everyone. At one point, she waved over a couple I didn't recognize. "This is my mom," she said with a bright smile. "She's staying with us for a while. It's been great having her here." Staying with us for a while. The words were casual, but they hit me harder than I expected. I had been living in the house for months. I cooked meals, took care of Emily, managed errands, even contributed to household expenses in small but steady ways. But to Anna, I was someone staying for a while, as though I were passing through, a temporary guest with no real place here. Again, I told myself not to overthink it. Maybe she was just being polite in front of her friends. Maybe she didn't want to explain the details. But each time she used that phrase, I felt a little less like I belonged. Over the next few months, small moments like these began to stack up. They weren't confrontations, just tiny reminders that I wasn't as firmly rooted in this family as I thought. Anna would talk about future plans, renovating the guest room into an office, rearranging the living space, without ever mentioning where I fit into those plans. I noticed, too, how she framed my presence in conversations with others. When she spoke to her coworkers on the phone, I'd sometimes overhear, "Oh, Mom's here, helping out while she figures out her next step." I wasn't figuring anything out. I was living here, part of the household. Or at least, that's what I believed. I began to feel a shift in how I carried myself in the house. I became more cautious, more deliberate. I avoided interrupting Anna when she was on calls. I kept to my room more often, especially when she had friends over. It wasn't that she asked me to, but I could sense an invisible boundary I wasn't meant to cross. These small moments might have seemed harmless to an outsider, but to me, they were like threads slowly unraveling. I felt myself slipping further from the narrative of the family, from the center of Emily's daily life to a quiet presence on the sidelines. At the time, I didn't see it as a pattern. I thought I was being sensitive, maybe even unfair to Anna. She had a busy life, a career, a child to raise. But there was an unease I couldn't quite name, a feeling that I was slowly being repositioned, subtly moved out of the frame. If I had paid closer attention, I might have recognized it for what it was. But back then, I just smiled, told myself I was overthinking and carried on. The recital hall smelled faintly of polished wood and warm fabric from the rows of red velvet chairs. It was the kind of place that made you want to sit straighter, speak softer. I had been here many times before, for Emily's smaller showcases and seasonal concerts, but today felt different. Today was the end-of-year recital, the big one. I'd been there for every lesson, every practice, every time Emily's tiny fingers fumbled over a tricky passage only to master it weeks later. I had no doubt she would play beautifully, and somewhere deep down I thought this day would also be a quiet acknowledgement of all that work. Not in a grand way, but maybe a small thank you, a nod, a glance, something. We arrived early. I helped Emily adjust the bow in her hair, smoothing stray strands and straightening the ribbon on her dress. She was radiant, nervous but excited. Anna stood nearby, scrolling through her phone, occasionally glancing up to tell Emily she looked beautiful. Mark joined us just before the program began, taking a seat near the aisle. As the lights dimmed, the room filled with polite applause for the first few students. My heart swelled with every performance, my hands folded tightly in my lap as I waited for Emily's turn. When her name was called, she walked to the piano with the kind of poise that made me proud beyond words. The first notes were tentative, then grew confident, flowing into the melodies she'd practiced for weeks. I could almost see the hours we'd spent in the car together, humming scales, her tiny hands tapping along with the rhythm of the road. The applause at the end was loud, enthusiastic. Anna stood to clap. Mark smiled broadly, and I felt a warmth spread through me. This was her moment, but it felt like ours too. Then came the closing remarks. Mrs. Davis, the piano teacher, stepped to the microphone. "What a wonderful year it has been," she began, her voice bright with pride. "I want to thank all of our students for their hard work and dedication, and of course a special thank you to the parents for their commitment, driving to lessons, supporting practice, and making sure their children could succeed." I leaned forward slightly, waiting. It wasn't expectation so much as hope, a simple hope to be included, to be acknowledged, even in passing. And of course, Mrs. Davis continued with a smile toward our section. "Emily's mom and dad have been incredible supporters. We couldn't have done it without you." The audience clapped again. Anna beamed. Mark nodded politely. My hands froze mid-applause. No mention of me. 2 years of driving through rain, snow, and summer heat. 2 years of waiting in my car outside lessons, of organizing Emily's music books, of rearranging my days around her schedule. And in this moment, in front of everyone, it was as though I hadn't existed at all. I felt the air shift around me. My chest tightened, but I kept my face calm, my hands coming together in a measured clap. My smile stayed fixed, though it felt brittle. Beside me, Anna leaned slightly toward Mark. "That was so sweet," she whispered. "I'm glad they noticed." I caught those words, but I said nothing. The recital ended. Parents gathered their children, and families took photos with the teacher. Anna pulled Emily into a proud embrace. Mark took a picture on his phone, and I stepped back, letting them have their moment. Inside, though, something had shifted. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I didn't need public recognition to know my worth. But the sting of being erased was sharp, sharper than I expected. On the drive home, Emily chattered happily about the other performances. Anna spoke about plans for dinner. I kept my eyes on the road, nodding at the right moments, my hands steady on the wheel. When we got home, Anna thanked me for driving as she always did, casual and light. It was such a small thing, those words. "Thanks for driving, Mom." But they landed differently now. I smiled back because that's what I had always done. But deep inside, a quiet awareness began to form. It was the first time I truly felt the weight of being on the outside of my own story. The car ride home was filled with Emily's excited chatter. She replayed the recital in vivid detail, talking about which pieces she liked most, how the teacher smiled at her, how the applause felt like a warm wave rushing over her. Her joy was genuine, untainted by anything that had unsettled me at the ceremony. Anna, seated in the passenger seat, was in equally high spirits. She had a bouquet of bright lilies on her lap, a gift from the teacher. "Wasn't that thoughtful?" she said, turning to Emily. "Mrs. Davis really appreciates the effort we've all put in this year." I kept my eyes on the road, my hands steady on the wheel. The words slid over me like rain on glass. "We've all put in." A harmless phrase, perhaps, or maybe another thread tugging at a much bigger knot. The images began replaying in my mind, uninvited. 2 winters ago, scraping ice off the windshield before an early lesson. The times I waited in the car with the heater running, a thermos of hot cocoa in the cup holder for Emily after class. Rainy afternoons when I'd towel off her hair before she even unbuckled her seatbelt. Sweltering summer days when I'd roll the windows down and listen to her hum scales along with the cicadas outside. Every moment felt small at the time. Together, they were the unseen work that built her music, and today they had all vanished into silence. At home, Emily dashed off to her room to change, still buzzing with excitement. Anna placed the lilies in a vase on the kitchen table, arranging them so that every bloom faced outward. She hummed a little tune as she worked, one of Emily's recital pieces. "Such a great day," she said brightly. "I'm so glad we've been able to make this happen for her. She's lucky to have such supportive parents." Parents. I felt the word settle like a stone in my chest. I wasn't looking for titles or accolades, but the way she said it, so completely, so casually, made me wonder if she even realized I existed in that equation. Mark came home a few minutes later, congratulating Emily again and praising Anna for her dedication. They talked about the recital, the speeches, how proud they were. My name didn't surface once. I excused myself to the back porch, saying I needed some air. The evening was warm, the light fading into a deep gold. I sat on the old wooden bench, my hands folded in my lap, the hum of their voices drifting faintly through the screen door. Until that moment, I had told myself that the small slights, the omissions, were accidents, oversights born from busy schedules or thoughtless habits. But tonight, something felt different. It wasn't the lack of credit that stung most. It was the realization that Anna wasn't even trying to hide the fact that she was the one being acknowledged. She seemed comfortable with it, pleased even. I began to wonder how many times she had taken credit for my work without me there to hear it. The thought was a quiet, steady ache. Later, as we sat down to dinner, Anna spoke about the next season of lessons, how Emily might be ready for more advanced pieces, how scheduling might work. She spoke as though the logistics of practice, transportation, and preparation were just naturally part of her role, as though the last 2 years had been an effortless collaboration between her and Mark. I ate my meal quietly, offering a smile when Emily asked for more mashed potatoes, nodding when Mark spoke about his week at work. Outwardly, I was calm. Inside, a new awareness was forming. This wasn't an isolated moment. It wasn't just the recital. It wasn't just a slip of the tongue. I didn't yet know what it was exactly, but I knew it wasn't accidental. It was a Tuesday afternoon, quiet except for the faint hum of the dishwasher. I was folding laundry in my room when I heard Anna's voice carry down the hallway. She was in the kitchen, on the phone. Her tone was cheerful, light, but the words made me pause. "Oh, it's been so convenient having Mom here," she said. "We've saved so much. No need for a babysitter, and it's comforting to know Emily's always with family. Plus, Mom's happy here. She gets company, and we get the help. It works perfectly." I stood still, a dish towel half folded in my hands. I knew she didn't mean it as an insult. Not exactly. But something in the way she framed it, "we get the help," made my role sound transactional, a convenience. I wasn't part of the family rhythm. I was a resource. I set the towel down slowly, her words lingering. Later that week, while tidying up the study, I came across a neat stack of papers on Anna's desk. She often left her mail there to sort, and I sometimes moved it to keep the space organized. That's when I saw it. A thank you letter from Mrs. Davis, Emily's piano teacher. "Dear Anna and Mark," it began, "I want to express my gratitude for your dedication over the past 2 years. It's rare to see parents so consistent and invested in their child's musical growth. Your commitment has truly made a difference in Emily's success." 2 years. I stared at the letter for a long moment. My name wasn't there. Not in the greeting, not in the closing, not anywhere. I thought about every trip to the piano school, every gallon of gas, every hour spent waiting in my car. And then I thought about the receipts tucked neatly in my desk drawer, every month's tuition paid from my checking account. I had never minded covering it. It was for Emily, after all, but seeing it framed this way without a trace of my contribution stirred something sharp in my chest. It wasn't the omission itself. It was the pattern, the recital, the introductions at parties, the phone calls, now this letter. It felt like I had been quietly erased, replaced in the story by someone else who hadn't done the work. I carefully set the letter back where I found it, my movements deliberate. My mind, however, was racing. For the first time, I felt a small shift in myself. I wasn't just hurt, I was alert. I began to see these moments not as isolated oversights, but as pieces of something larger. That evening at dinner, Anna spoke casually about Emily's next lessons. "We'll probably need to look at the new schedule," she said to Mark. "Mrs. Davis was saying how much she appreciates our commitment." I looked at her, just briefly, and said nothing. But in my mind, I began to gather the first threads of something I hadn't considered before, a pattern. After finding the letter from Mrs. Davis, something inside me shifted. I stopped telling myself these were isolated accidents. I started paying attention. It wasn't about snooping or prying. It was about looking directly at the truth I'd been avoiding. One quiet evening, while Anna was out with Mark and Emily was at a sleepover, I sat at my small desk in the guest room. I opened the drawer where I kept my receipts and paperwork. Every tuition payment from the past 2 years was there, filed neatly by month. The amounts were clear, the checks all drawn from my account. I lined them up in order, the way you might lay out evidence for a case. Seeing them all together like that made something crystallize. It wasn't just my time that had been erased from the story, it was my money too. The next day, I overheard another conversation, this time with Anna's in-laws. She was on speakerphone in the kitchen while I was in the hallway sorting laundry. Her tone was cheerful, casual. "Oh, Mom's staying here has worked out so well," she said to Mark's mother. "It's been good for everyone. She doesn't have to worry about rent, and we get to have her help with Emily. It's really a win-win." I stopped folding. "She's lucky she can be here," Anna added lightly. "Not everyone gets to live with family for free." There it was again, that word, lucky. As if my presence here was a favor granted to me, rather than an exchange of care, time, and support. I finished the laundry in silence, my mind churning. Later that night, when the house was quiet, I went into the study to leave some mail on Anna's desk. That's when I saw her laptop still open. Normally, I wouldn't touch her computer, but the screen was lit and an email was sitting right there in the drafts folder. The subject line read, "Recital Remarks, Final Request." I hesitated. My hand hovered over the mouse. Something inside me said I shouldn't look. But then I remembered the moment at the recital, the bouquet of lilies, the way my name had disappeared entirely from the thank yous. I clicked. The email was to Mrs. Davis, the piano teacher. It was short, polite, but it stopped me cold. "Hi, Mrs. Davis. Thank you for including us in the closing remarks. Just one small request. If you could keep the thank you to Emily's parents, that would be great. It keeps things simpler for the audience. Appreciate your understanding. Best, Anna." I read it twice, then a third time. It wasn't an oversight. It wasn't forgetfulness. It was intentional. I closed the laptop slowly, my hands trembling slightly. The air in the room felt heavier, as though the truth had been sitting here all along, waiting for me to open my eyes. This was no longer about hurt feelings. This was about control, about shaping a narrative where I didn't exist in any meaningful way. I walked back to my room, sat down on the bed, and stared at the floor. For a long time, I had told myself that love was enough, that the years of raising Anna, the memories we shared, the bond with Emily, would always outweigh any small tensions. But this wasn't a small tension anymore. This was deliberate. And for the first time, I felt something I hadn't let myself feel before. Anger. It wasn't the kind that burns hot and fast. It was colder, steadier. A slow, measured resolve that settled deep in my chest. I didn't know yet what I was going to do, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let this version of the story stand. I sat in the guest room long after finding the email, the glow from the hallway nightlight barely reaching the edges of my desk. The silence of the house was thick, and every word from that email echoed in my head like a bell. It wasn't just about the recital. It wasn't about a slip in conversation or a momentary oversight. Anna had asked explicitly that my name be left out. This wasn't absence. It was removal. Deliberate, controlled. My hands felt cold as I thought back to all the times I'd brushed off her comments, the moments I'd told myself I was imagining things. I had wanted so badly to believe her warmth was genuine, that the small jabs and careful omissions were unintentional, but now I could see the pattern clearly. She had been writing me out of the picture for months, maybe years. The pain wasn't sharp like it had been at the recital. It was heavier now, a dull, steady weight. It pressed against my chest, making it hard to breathe. But beneath it, something else was forming, something steadier. Resolve. I wasn't the kind of woman who yelled or staged dramatic confrontations. I had never been one to seek revenge. But there was a difference between revenge and reclaiming your place in the truth. I thought about Emily, about how one day she might look back on these years and believe the story Anna had built, that her mother had carried all the weight, that her grandmother had simply been there. That terrified me more than anything. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about the truth that Emily deserved to know, one day, if not now. For the next few days, I moved through the house quietly, almost as if nothing had changed, but inside every detail became sharper. I noticed how Anna accepted praise from her friends for managing Emily's schedule, without a hint of hesitation. I noticed the way she glossed over my presence when talking to Mark about household responsibilities. I began collecting small pieces of evidence, not in a vindictive way, just quietly, methodically. The tuition receipts, the gas records, photos from the countless Saturdays at the piano studio, little details that told the truth of where I had been, what I had done. I kept them tucked away in a folder in my drawer. I wasn't sure yet how I would use them, but I knew they mattered. One evening, Emily came into my room holding a drawing. It was the two of us sitting in the car. Her little handwriting at the top read, "Me and Grandma going to piano." I smiled as I took it from her, my throat tightening. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," I said softly. She grinned. "You take me every week. I wanted to draw it so I remember." Her words landed heavier than she knew. Even at 10 years old, she recognized who had been there. After she went to bed, I stared at the drawing for a long time. I realized then that the truth didn't have to be shouted to be seen. Sometimes it just needed the right moment, the right light. I didn't need to storm into the kitchen and demand recognition. That wasn't who I was, but I could make sure that when the moment came, the story couldn't be spun any other way. That night, lying in bed, I started to think about what that moment could look like. I didn't want to humiliate Anna. I didn't want to hurt her in front of her husband, her friends, or Emily, but I wanted the truth to be undeniable. A plan began to take shape, not fully formed, but enough to feel the edges of it. It wouldn't be loud, it wouldn't be angry, but it would be final. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of control. I didn't know exactly how the ending would unfold, but I knew I was no longer drifting in someone else's story. For now, I would wait, quietly, carefully, and when the time came, I would make sure my part of the truth was impossible to ignore. The plan came to me one evening as I sat on the back porch, watching the sun set behind the maple trees. The air was cool, the house quiet. Inside, Anna was helping Emily with homework, her voice drifting faintly through the open window. I realized I didn't need to confront her in the heat of anger. That would only lead to defensiveness, denial, maybe even accusations of misunderstanding. No, I needed a setting where the truth could be laid out plainly, without shouting, without room for twisting. A family dinner. It had been a while since Anna had invited the extended family over. Usually, gatherings were limited to birthdays or holidays, but I could host one. A celebration, I would call it. Something warm, casual, inclusive. Over the next few days, I began planning quietly. I invited Mark's parents, Anna's cousins, even Mrs. Davis, the piano teacher. Just a small get-together, I told each of them on the phone. A chance to celebrate Emily's wonderful year of music and how far she's come. Anna was delighted when she heard the idea. "That's so thoughtful, Mom. Emily will love it. I'll help you set the table." I smiled, my expression calm, hiding the steady hum of resolve beneath. In the days leading up to the dinner, I began preparing my materials. Late at night, after everyone had gone to bed, I took out the folder I'd been quietly building. I printed the tuition receipts, every single one, neatly dated and signed, showing 2 years of payments from my account. I included the gas records from the many drives to the piano studio. I even printed a handful of photos. Emily in the passenger seat of my car, Emily standing in front of the piano school, me holding her music books in the lobby. And then, the final piece, the email from Anna to Mrs. Davis requesting that I not be mentioned at the recital. I didn't print it to humiliate her. I printed it because it was the clearest proof that my absence from the story was not an accident. I placed all of these in a simple manila folder. No drama, no accusations, just facts. As the dinner approached, I went about my days as usual. I drove Emily to her lessons, prepared dinners, kept the house in order. Outwardly, nothing had changed. Inside, I felt a different kind of energy. It wasn't bitterness, it was focus. On the morning of the dinner, I woke early and began cooking. I made Anna's favorite roast chicken, Emily's favorite dessert. I arranged the table with fresh flowers. I wanted everything to feel warm and inviting. Anna was in good spirits, bustling around the kitchen, chatting about how nice it would be to see everyone together. "Mom, you always know how to make things special," she said with a smile. I smiled back, my heart steady. By the time the guests arrived, the house was filled with the smells of home cooking and the sound of easy conversation. Mark's parents brought wine. Anna's cousins brought a salad. Mrs. Davis arrived with a bouquet for Emily. Everyone settled around the table, laughter weaving through the meal. I waited, not in a tense, dramatic way, but with a quiet patience. The right moment would come. Halfway through dinner, when the plates had been cleared and the conversation was light, I reached for the folder I had tucked beside my chair. "Before we have dessert," I said, my voice calm, "I wanted to take a moment to celebrate Emily's accomplishments and to share a little bit about the journey these past 2 years." The table grew quiet. All eyes turned to me. I placed the folder on the table, resting my hand on it lightly. "I've been so proud to be part of her growth," I continued, "driving her to lessons, seeing her dedication. It's been a joy, and I thought it might be nice to share some of what went into that." I opened the folder, revealing the receipts, the photos, the printed schedules. "And this is just a little record of our time together," I said, my tone even. "Every Saturday drive, every lesson paid, every small step along the way." I didn't look at Anna. Not yet. The guests leaned in, murmuring softly as they looked at the neatly organized papers. Mark's parents exchanged surprised glances. Mrs. Davis shifted slightly in her seat, recognition flickering across her face. Still, I kept my tone gentle. It's been such a privilege to help her grow, and I'm grateful to have been part of it. There was no accusation, no anger, just the truth, laid out, undeniable. For the first time in months, I felt a strange sense of peace. The house glowed with a kind of warmth that could almost convince you nothing was wrong. The table was set beautifully. White linen tablecloth, polished silverware, candles casting a soft light that danced against the wine glasses. The smell of roast chicken and fresh herbs lingered in the air, wrapping everything in comfort. The guests arrived in high spirits. Mark's parents were the first through the door, bringing a bottle of red wine. Anna's cousins followed, chatting about their drive, and Mrs. Davis arrived soon after with a bouquet for Emily. Everyone settled into the rhythm of small talk, laughter filling the space. Anna moved through the room with the ease of a hostess who knew everything was under control. She had done this before. Entertaining came naturally to her. She offered drinks, made introductions, and checked on Emily with a proud smile. Every so often, her eyes landed on me, and there was an unspoken comfort in her expression. The confidence of someone who believed her mother would do what she always did: support, smile, and stay in the background. I kept my composure, moving through the evening just as I always had. I refilled water glasses, passed the bread basket, and laughed at the cousins' stories. If Anna noticed anything different, she didn't show it. But inside, I was steady in a way I hadn't been for months. This wasn't about catching her off guard or embarrassing her in front of the family. It was about balance, about letting the truth breathe in a room where it couldn't be ignored. Dinner unfolded as it always did. The food was passed around. Compliments were made about the chicken. Emily was praised for her recital performance. The conversation drifted from work to summer plans to light family gossip. It was warm, unthreatening, easy. Mark's father raised his glass at one point. "Here's to Emily," he said, smiling. "She's worked so hard this year. And of course, to Anna and Mark for making it all possible." Anna smiled, leaning slightly toward Mark as they clinked glasses. I smiled too, my hands resting calmly in my lap. My heartbeat was steady, my face relaxed. The evening moved forward, the plates cleared away, and the room seemed to settle into that comfortable post-dinner lull. It was the moment when conversation softened, when attention was easy to capture if you spoke clearly. I glanced around the table, my gaze pausing briefly on each face. They were all here. The people who had heard Anna's version of the story, the people who had accepted it as truth. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I reached down to where the manila folder rested against the side of my chair. My fingers brushed over its smooth surface, but I didn't bring it out yet. Not here, not now. Instead, I spoke softly, my voice cutting gently through the conversation. "I just wanted to take a moment before dessert," I began. The table quieted. Anna glanced at me, a polite curiosity in her expression. "I wanted to thank everyone for being here tonight," I continued. "This year has been special. For Emily, of course, but also for me. It's been a joy to watch her grow, to see her dedication pay off." Anna nodded, smiling warmly, her confidence unshaken. "And I thought," I added, "it might be nice to share a little about the journey we've had over these past 2 years." I saw a flicker in Anna's expression then, just the briefest hesitation, but she quickly smoothed it over. I didn't reveal anything more. Not yet. I let the words hang there, light and harmless, as the conversation picked back up. Inside, though, the air had shifted. The room didn't know it yet, but the evening was moving toward a moment no one would forget. The hum of conversation had just begun to soften when I reached for the folder beside my chair. The weight of it was small, but I felt the shift in the air the moment I placed it gently on the table. "I thought," I said, my tone warm but steady, "that since we're all here to celebrate Emily's year in music, we could take a moment to look back at what these past 2 years have been like." Anna smiled politely, clearly expecting a sentimental speech. Mark's parents leaned in, curious. Mrs. Davis's eyebrows lifted slightly in interest. I opened the folder, my movements calm, deliberate. The first thing I laid on the table was a neatly printed stack of tuition receipts, each one dated, each one signed, each one showing my account. "I kept these more out of habit than anything else," I said, my voice even. 2 years of Saturday lessons faithfully attended, every month's tuition accounted for. There was a soft murmur around the table. Anna's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Next, I placed several photographs on the table. Emily in her recital dress, Emily sitting in the passenger seat of my car holding her music books, Emily outside the piano school on a snowy morning. These, I continued, are just a few moments from our weekly routine. Rain or shine, we made it to every lesson. Anna shifted in her seat. Mark looked from the photos to me, his brow furrowed slightly. Finally, I placed the last page from the folder on the table. The printed email. The one Anna had sent to Mrs. Davis before the recital. I didn't read it aloud. I didn't have to. I simply rested my hand lightly on it. For me, I said, looking around the table, this hasn't been about credit. It hasn't been about recognition. It's been about supporting Emily, being part of her growth. That's all I've ever wanted. I paused, my gaze sweeping the room. But I also believe in the importance of truth. And the truth is that these past 2 years have been a team effort, one that I've been proud to be part of. The room was quiet. Mark's parents exchanged glances, their expressions uncertain. Mrs. Davis looked down at the email, her lips pressing together. Anna's voice broke the silence, light but tense. "Mom, this isn't necessary. Everyone knows you've been involved." Before she could finish, Emily's small voice cut through the room. "I know Grandma takes me every week," she said firmly, her eyes wide and earnest. "She's the one who drives me. She waits for me. She even brings me hot chocolate in winter. I told Mrs. Davis that once." Every head at the table turned toward Emily. Her cheeks flushed, but her gaze didn't waver. Anna's lips parted slightly, as though she wanted to respond, but no words came. Mark cleared his throat softly, leaning back in his chair. "I didn't realize you'd been handling all of that yourself, Mom," he said quietly, looking at me. I offered a small smile, my voice calm. "It's never been a burden, but I think sometimes it's easy to forget the details when life moves quickly." I let the moment settle. The room felt different now, quieter, heavier, not hostile but aware. I gathered the receipts and photos back into the folder, leaving the email where it was. I didn't press the point. I didn't raise my voice. I simply left the truth sitting there, plain and unembellished. There was no need for anything more. The silence after Emily's words hung in the air longer than anyone expected. It wasn't uncomfortable exactly, but it had weight, like a room holding its breath. Anna shifted in her chair, her face carefully composed but just slightly too still. Her usual confidence had thinned, replaced by a faint flush along her cheeks. She glanced at Mark, then at her cousins, as though searching for the right tone to strike. Mark looked at her, then at me. His voice, when it came, was measured. "I think we've all maybe assumed certain things without looking too closely at the details." He cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable. "Mom, I didn't realize the extent of what you've been doing for Emily. I should have paid more attention." I smiled faintly, my tone even. "You've both been busy. It's natural for things to slip by." Across the table, Mark's parents shifted slightly in their seats. His mother gave me a small, thoughtful nod, her expression carrying something between acknowledgement and apology. Anna spoke then, her voice calm but clipped at the edges. "I never meant to make you feel left out, Mom. If it came across that way, I'm sorry." I looked at her for a long moment. Her words were careful, chosen for the audience in the room. But I wasn't here for an apology. Not really. "It's not about feeling left out," I said softly. "It's about making sure the story is honest. Not for me, but for Emily. She should grow up knowing all the people who cared for her, who made her life possible." Emily looked between us, sensing the undercurrent even if she didn't understand all of it. I glanced around the table then, at the family members who had heard a version of the story where I was little more than a guest. "I've been grateful to be here, to be part of this home," I said. but I think it might be time for me to make a small change." Anna's brow furrowed slightly. "What do you mean?" I folded my hands loosely in my lap. "I've found a little apartment nearby. It's nothing big, but it's enough for me. I'll be moving there next month." The words landed quietly, but the effect was immediate. Mark's fork stilled in his hand. Anna straightened in her seat, her composure flickering. "Mom, you don't have to do that," she said quickly. "You're welcome here." "I know," I said gently, "and I'm thankful. But it's time for me to have a place that's my own again. That way, when I'm here, it's by choice, not necessity. That feels healthier for everyone." The table stayed silent for a moment, the shift settling in. This wasn't anger, it wasn't punishment, it was something quieter, more decisive. Mark finally nodded. "If that's what you want, we'll support you." His voice was calmer now, as though he understood this was more than just a move. It was a boundary. Anna stayed quiet, her expression unreadable. I smiled at Emily then, reaching for her hand. "I'll still take you to lessons when I can," I said softly, "and you can come visit me any time. My new place has room for your piano books." Her face lit up, easing some of the heaviness in the room. I leaned back in my chair, letting the conversation drift again, this time in a gentler current. The tension had shifted, not gone, but softened. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't demand contrition. I simply left the truth where it belonged and stepped quietly toward my own space. For the first time in a long time, I felt light. 3 months passed quickly, though each week felt quietly transformative. My new apartment wasn't grand, just a modest one-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a brick building overlooking a quiet park. The living room had space for a small couch, a bookshelf, and a sturdy oak table where sunlight pooled in the mornings. It was mine. There was a quiet satisfaction in waking up and making coffee in a kitchen where every mug was exactly where I left it. My days had a new rhythm now, mornings with the park outside my window, afternoons reading, and sometimes dinners with neighbors who had quickly become friends. Emily came to visit almost every weekend. At first, Anna drove her over, but soon Emily insisted on biking the short distance herself, her backpack stuffed with music books. She'd plop them onto my table, pulling out her sheet music as if no time had passed at all. We developed new rituals. Saturday mornings weren't for rushed drives to lessons anymore. Now they were for leisurely pancakes, practicing scales together and taking slow walks to the park. Emily liked to say my apartment felt peaceful. I could see how much she relaxed here, away from the schedules, the constant movement of her own house. One Saturday, as she played an easy melody on my small keyboard, she looked up and said, "Grandma, I like that this place is just yours. It feels special." Her words stayed with me long after she'd left that afternoon. Anna's visits were less frequent but different. She no longer spoke to me as though I were just part of the household machinery. When she called, it was to invite me to Emily's recitals, to family dinners, to casual outings. And each time, there was a note in her voice I hadn't heard before: respect. At first, I thought it might be politeness born from discomfort. But over time, it became clear that something had shifted for her too. Perhaps it was the way the dinner had unfolded that night, or perhaps she had time to reflect in my absence. Either way, the invitations now felt genuine. One Sunday, she came by with Emily to pick me up for lunch. As we walked to the car, she hesitated. "Mom," she said softly, "I'm glad you're close by. I didn't realize how much I'd miss you in the house." I smiled, hearing the sincerity even if it was understated. "I'm glad I'm close too," I said. "This way we both have space, and that makes the time we spend together even better." Mark, too, seemed more at ease now. When I visited their home, there was no undercurrent of awkwardness. He greeted me warmly, included me naturally in conversations, and never once made a comment about me staying anywhere. I wasn't a guest anymore. I was family, on my own terms. Emily's recitals continued, and each time I attended, I noticed something new. When Mrs. Davis thanked the parents. She now also smiled at me, adding, "And to her grandmother, who's been a constant source of support." The first time she said it, Anna glanced at me across the room with a small nod. It wasn't an apology, but it was acknowledgement. And that was enough. Life in my little apartment had given me something I didn't know I'd lost, a sense of self that wasn't tied to proving my worth in someone else's home. I could still love, still give, still be present, without being erased in the process. And the best part was that somehow setting those boundaries hadn't pushed my family away. It had drawn them closer, in a healthier way. As summer rolled in, Emily and I spent more time at the park. She'd bring her music and practice under the shade of the trees while I read nearby. Sometimes Anna joined us on weekends, sitting on the grass, listening quietly. There were no comments about obligations, no subtle remarks about who was lucky. Just family. It wasn't perfect. No family ever is. But there was balance now. And as I watched Emily laugh in the sunlight, I realized that perhaps the biggest change wasn't in Anna or in Mark, but in me. I had learned that my presence in their lives didn't need to be constant to be meaningful. It needed to be intentional, chosen, and respected. I still drove Emily to the occasional lesson. I still attended dinners. I still sat in the back of recital halls clapping with pride. But now, every time I walked back to my own apartment afterward, I felt a quiet certainty. I was no longer part of the story by default. I was part of it because I chose to be. It was a quiet Sunday morning when I finally realized how much my life had changed. Sunlight streamed through the curtains of my small apartment, painting the walls in warm gold. I sat at my oak table with a cup of coffee, the park below alive with the sounds of children playing and birdsong. For the first time in years, my life felt steady. Not because everything was perfect, but because I had found my own balance. I thought back to the months before the recital, the unspoken slights, the careful omissions, the moments I told myself I was overthinking. At the time, I thought staying silent was the kindest choice, the path of least resistance. But silence, I had learned, can erase you just as much as words can. It wasn't about demanding credit. It wasn't about recognition in front of a crowd. It was about respect, the quiet kind that doesn't need applause, only truth. Moving out hadn't been a punishment for Anna. It hadn't been an act of anger. It was an act of love for myself, a way of setting a boundary without shutting anyone out. And in doing so, I had given her something too, the space to see me as more than a fixture in her home. Emily had adapted beautifully. Our relationship was stronger than ever, unburdened by the small tensions that had once existed in that shared house. She came to me freely, happily, not because I was always there, but because she wanted to be. Anna had changed as well. She was still Anna, driven, organized, and sometimes too quick to frame the narrative her own way. But there was a new softness in her when she spoke to me. Invitations came with warmth, not obligation. There was no more talk of me staying or being lucky, just family. I had learned that boundaries don't mean shutting doors. They mean opening them in ways that let everyone breathe. As I sipped my coffee, I realized how far I had come from the woman who first moved into Anna's house, quietly grateful to have a roof over her head and a role in Emily's life. Back then, I thought my place depended on being useful, on cooking, cleaning, driving, and paying. Now, I knew my place came from who I was, not what I did. I thought about all the women I'd known, friends, neighbors, women from church, who had found themselves in similar positions, moving in with adult children, grateful for the space, and slowly finding themselves smaller and smaller in the family story. If there was one thing I wanted them to hear, it was this. Love is not measured by silence, and respect is not earned by disappearing into the background. Being part of a family is a choice made stronger when there are boundaries, when there is truth. I set my coffee down and smiled, thinking of Emily's next visit. She had a new piece to play for me, one she was excited about. I knew she would bound into my apartment, drop her music books on the table, and start without even taking off her jacket. And I would sit there, listening, proud as ever. Not because of my role in getting her to this moment, but because of the young person she was becoming. That, I realized, was the real reward. My story hadn't ended with confrontation or anger. It had ended with clarity, with a place of my own, a family that respected me, and a granddaughter who would grow up knowing the truth of who had been there for her. As I watched the sunlight stretch across the room, I felt the quiet certainty of a lesson learned. Sacrifice is beautiful, but sacrifice without respect is simply surrender. And I was done surrendering.